Hello, and welcome to our Wednesday morning live stream offered here from Empty Cloud Monastery. Usually our dear Venerable Ayya Vaḍḍha is leading these sessions on Wednesday mornings, but today she's not able to, so I'll be taking over. My name is Venerable Vaḍḍha, and I hope that you're all having a good morning or a good evening, good afternoon, whatever time it is that you're watching this teaching and this sharing. And today we'll be going over a sutta, one of the discourses of the Buddha, who is our teacher. And these discourses have been miraculously, almost you could say, passed down through the hands of the tradition so that they're accessible to us even today online. Even today in modern format with modern technology, they are accessible to us. And so these are, as I mentioned, discourses. These are teachings from the Buddha, from his disciples, from the tradition. And this sutta that we'll be looking at today, which is available, you can see the number for the discourse in the title of the video, as well as the link for the discourse in the show notes, in the description of the video. This discourse is from the Samyutta Nikaya, which is the collection on the connected topics, the discourses which are related by the topic, related by particular themes. And this is the chapter, the collection of suttas, of discourses, which are all on the theme of the Four Noble Truths. It's called the Satya Samyutta. So the collected, the chapter, the collection on the truths. And this is the seventh discourse. So it's the seventh one in the first subsection, right? If we want to kind of break it down to help you navigate. And this is called the Vitaka Sutta, which means the sutta, the discourse on thought. And so I will begin by rendering homage to the Buddha, and you're welcome to join along if you'd like. And after that, we can go ahead and read through the sutta and offer some reflections. And at the end, if you have, of course, any questions, any comments, please feel free to leave those in the live description, the live chat, and I'll go ahead and address those if there is time at the end. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So our sutta, Vitaka Sutta, begins. Mendicants, don't think bad, unskillful thoughts, such as sensual, malicious, and cruel thoughts. Why is that? Because those thoughts aren't beneficial or relevant to the fundamentals of the spiritual life. They don't lead to disillusionment, to dispassion, cessation, to peace, to insight, to awakening, or to extinguishment. When you think, you should think, this is suffering, this is the origin of suffering, this is the cessation of suffering, this is the practice that leads to the cessation of suffering. Why is that? Because those thoughts are beneficial and relevant to the fundamentals of the spiritual life. They lead to disillusionment, to dispassion, to cessation, to peace, to insight, to awakening, and to extinguishment. Therefore, mendicants, you should practice meditation to understand this is suffering, this is the origin of suffering, this is the cessation of suffering, and this is the practice that leads to the cessation of suffering. And that is the end of our sutta, so we can go ahead and respect the discourse with 3 sadhus, which means, in a modern translation, awesome or excellent. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And so this is, as you can see, this is quite a simple sutta, right? Quite a simple discourse, but also very profound, very deep, right? And this is one of those things that, sometimes when you think about profound, if you think about what does it mean for something to be deep, for it to be subtle, for it to be profound. And maybe you're used to our education system where we're taught long, complicated topics, where you need to study for many, many hours. You need to stay up at night drinking lots of coffee, and you need to cram for the exams. And the exams need to be many hours long. And so sometimes we think that difficult topics, we think that deep topics means complex, right? Or we think that if something takes a lot of words, then it means that it's very deep. And if you can say something in few words, then it must be very simple, right? And so you'll notice, right, when you say deep and simple, it's as if simple is the opposite to deep, right? The opposite to profound. And simple is the opposite of something being complex, right? So again, it's almost like in our language, in our culture, something being simple and something being complex, something being deep and something being not so deep. These are almost considered synonyms to one another. But in the teachings of the Buddha, in the training, in the Dhamma Vinaya of the Buddha, in the Buddha Sasana, simple and deep are not opposites, right? They are not antonyms. They are actually synonyms. In a way, of course, there are complex topics and there are things that take some time. But you'll notice that actually the Buddha's core teaching, the Buddha's most fundamental teaching, that which he spent his whole life after his full awakening, what did he spend teaching, declaring, announcing, elucidating, explaining, revealing? Well, fundamentally, it was the Four Noble Truths, right? And so it's 4 phrases, right? Or it's even 4 words, right? Dukkhaṃ samudaya nirodho magga. And so these 4 words, right? Suffering or difficulty, pain, the origin, its cessation, and the path which leads to the cessation. That's what the Buddha was teaching, explaining, revealing, right? And so we can see that in this sutta, the Buddha is teaching that same thing, right? He's describing that same thing. And he's contrasting it to unskillful thoughts. Okay, so in this sutta, the Buddha is talking about our thinking, right? And again, sometimes we are told, no thinking, we shouldn't be thinking at all, right? That Buddhism is not about thinking. And of course, thinking does need to be, we do need to practice to find silence. And we need to find peace and we need to appreciate stopping our thoughts. We need to learn to stop our thoughts. But actually, we also do need to think. It's the nature of our mind when it's active to think, right? It's what we do. And so even arahants will think, right? The mind will be moving around. Unless you can bring it to a state of deep stillness, your mind is going to be moving around. And so especially if we are just trying to do our best to train our minds, just trying to do our best to find a sense of well-being, right? A sense of ease, in the sense of peace, a sense of happiness. And trying to understand life, trying to understand what is going on here, trying to understand the nature of life, of existence, of our minds, of our bodies. And so our thoughts are going to be running and they're going to be moving. And the Buddha is actually teaching us that when we're thinking, we need to be directing them in a skillful way, right? And so this echoes another teaching in the suttas where the Buddha talks about two kinds of thought. And he talks about before his enlightenment, when he was still striving to attain awakening, he decided that he would divide up his thoughts into two categories. He said he would divide his thoughts into those thoughts which were unskillful and which didn't lead to his goal, and those thoughts which instead were skillful, which were helpful, beneficial, wholesome, and which did lead towards the goal he was going for, he was striving for. They did lead him towards awakening. So he divided his thoughts like that into two categories. And whenever he saw that thoughts were unwholesome, they were unbeneficial and unskillful, he would try to set those aside. But whenever he saw thoughts which were wholesome and beneficial, he would cultivate those. He would not be concerned with those until only later on, when he decided that he wanted to still his mind even further, then he would let go of the wholesome thoughts. Right? So first, though, the Buddha took on this practice. He himself, before he was awakened, right, he took on that practice of dividing his thoughts. And so if you're wondering, what was the Buddha's practice like before he was awakened? What was his meditation methods and so on? Well, this is a sutta, not the one that we have here, but you can see the theme is related, of dividing your thoughts into wholesome and unwholesome, skillful and unskillful, useful and useless, beneficial and harmful. Dividing those, learning to distinguish those types of thoughts, right? And then developing and cultivating the beneficial ones. And so this is a crucial aspect of the sasana, of the Buddha's teachings, of the Buddha's message of the religion. And that is to cultivate, to develop, to make much of what is beneficial, what is beautiful, right? We want to make our mind wholesome. We want to make our mind beautiful, right? And we often wear jewelry or makeup. If you're going about your day, you might, dress up and try to make yourself look beautiful, try to make yourself look handsome. But what matters in the Buddha's Dhamma Vinaya, in the Buddha's teaching and his training, is making our minds beautiful, right? It's making our minds beautiful. And similarly, in order to make ourselves beautiful, we have to wash away the dirt, right? We have to clean our minds up. So we can't just put makeup and perfumes if we haven't showered in 3 months, and if we haven't, we have dirt and mud and dust all over ourselves, and if our clothes haven't been washed in a long, long time, we can't just put a little spritz of cologne and some makeup over, right? We need to wash ourselves first, and then we can develop, right? So these two go together, right? These two practices, the practices of developing what is good and of abandoning what is bad, of cultivating what is beneficial and of removing what is unbeneficial, right? And this is actually a skill that we really should appreciate, that we should really value, right? This is the craft. This is the trade. This is the skill. This is the ability, right? That we should develop and cultivate, that we should make much of and learn about. This is what we should be studying, right? So right in the heart, right in the mind, that's where we can study, we can learn what is beneficial for my well-being, right? For my happiness, for my peace, for a sense of contentment, to be kind to other people, to be gentle with others and myself, to develop more clarity of mind, to develop more wisdom, right? To develop the practices, the path, the factors that are going to lead me onward. And this is what the Buddha here is emphasizing, right? What is it that distinguishes the thoughts that we should cultivate and those thoughts which we should abandon? And he points out this list, right, of thoughts which lead towards, as he says, leads towards disillusionment, nibbida, which lead towards dispassion, viraga, which leads towards cessation, nirodha, which lead towards peace, upasana, which lead towards insight, abhinya, which lead towards awakening, sambodhi, and which lead towards extinguishment, nibbana. So we check, right? Do these thoughts lead towards that goal? Do they lead towards those wholesome things, those wholesome states and qualities, those wholesome abidings, or do they lead away from them? Do they lead against them? Are they a detriment towards them? Right? And so Mind is not just a machine which produces thoughts. It's not that all thoughts are equal, right? It's not just a machine which is producing thoughts that we have to remove. No, there are some which will actually lead to that, right? Notice the Buddha says there are thoughts which will lead towards nibbana, which will lead towards awakening, which will lead towards disillusionment, dispassion, cessation, peace, and insight, right? So there are thoughts which lead towards that goal. And there are thoughts which lead away from it. And so here the Buddha is giving some pointers on what are those unwholesome thoughts, right? He gives an example of 3. And he says that there are thoughts which are sensual thoughts, malicious or thoughts related to aversion, ill will, and cruel thoughts, right? Thoughts of harming. And you might recognize this list, right? This list of sensual thoughts, malicious thoughts, and cruel thoughts. And if you know your Buddhism, right? If you studied some Buddhism, then you might know that in the Buddha's description of the Noble Eightfold Path, right? The Vaḍḍha, the path which is the practice that leads to the end of suffering. Then one of the factors is samma sankappa, right? Sometimes translated as right intention. It can also be translated as right thought. And you see part of the reason why here, right? That actually Vitaka and sankappa, they're synonyms. These are 2 Pali words. Pali being the language of the Buddhist canon that we're looking at here. And so these 2 Pali words, Vitaka and sankappa, are often synonymous. And so they mean intentional activity of the mind, right? When the mind is intentionally applied towards certain things. Generally speaking, that's what we mean. And so what are these unwholesome thoughts, right? What are these qualities which we have to learn to abandon? We have to see the drawbacks in, and we have to learn to turn the mind away from them. Okay, so the first one is kama vitaka, sensual thoughts. Thoughts related to sensuality, to the sense pleasures of the world. And that is thoughts related to sights, right? Because the things that we see are so lovable, they're pleasing, they're delightful, we like them, right? We like to see beautiful things, beautiful scenery, beautiful people, beautiful nature, beautiful homes and cities and towns and cars and beautiful artwork. And we like to see beautiful things, right? So we're attracted to sights. When we see ugly sights, even ugly sights can be very compelling to the mind, right? Right? Like they say it's like a car crash, you can't look away. So sometimes things which are actually frightening, they still attract the mind. The mind loves and delights in sights. And similarly with sounds, right? Beautiful music, beautiful voices, beautiful nature sounds, animal sounds, and other types of sounds. Beautiful smells, beautiful tastes, and beautiful bodily sensations, right? We like comfort in the body. We don't like discomfort. And so even the things which are negative, our mind goes out towards them. Our mind latches onto them. Our mind is fixated and obsessed on this 5 sense world, the world of sights, of sounds, of smells, of tastes, and of touches, right? So our mind is fixated on those. It likes to go out, think about them, direct itself towards them, obsess over them, observe and watch them. And this is a hindrance to developing our meditation. The very first hindrance, kama chanda, means interest in sensuality, being interested in the sense pleasures of the world. When the mind is interested, it can't be settled, it can't be still. And so we have to learn, when is our mind thinking thoughts which are sensual? And I talked about this recently in one of the suttas where the Buddha was describing actually the similar category of wrong thoughts. And so we talked about this, and sensual thoughts doesn't just mean whenever you're aware of sensual pleasures like sight, sound, smells, tastes, and touches, or even thinking about them, because as I mentioned, we have to think about these things, right? To a certain extent, we have to think about these things, right? Because you have to eat, you have to walk around, you have to see things, right? You have functioning ears, and you have to listen to words and interpret noises. And so we have to use our senses, and we have to think about our senses. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to function in the world. So sensual thoughts are not just when the mind is aware, but it's when the mind is getting involved in those things, getting attached, getting fixated, right? Getting interested in deriving safety, deriving pleasure, deriving a sense of identity, feeding off of the sights, the sounds, the smells, the tastes, and the touches. When the mind is going out and getting fixated on these things, right? So this is the problem. It's not just the thoughts in and of themselves, but it's the intentions behind those thoughts, right? It's the intention which is directing the thought. Why are we thinking it? And so sensual thoughts means thoughts which were directing the mind out towards because of an interest in sensual pleasures, because of enthusiasm, because of a trust, a faith in sensual pleasures, right? So we have faith. Everyone has faith. And generally speaking, from the day we were born, actually for all human beings, for all animals, from the day we are born, we have faith, blind faith, unreasoned faith, unquestioned faith in sensual pleasures. Every single human being. Because the reason that we're born as human beings is because of our interest in sensual pleasures, right? So if anyone is born as a human being, you can know they have greed, they have hatred, and they have delusion. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been born as a human. Now, some humans are able to later purify their minds. But all humans are born with an interest in sensual pleasures. That's why we have eyes. That's why we have ears. We have eyes because we wanted to see. We got what we wanted. And we have ears because we wanted to hear, and we've got what we wanted. We have a nose because we wanted to smell. We have a tongue because we wanted to taste. And we have a body because we wanted to feel. And so we have these senses. And so all of us are born with these senses. And along with these senses, when we're born, right, along with them comes a big, heavy dose of greed, a heavy dose of hatred, aversion, and a heavy dose of delusion, of confusion, misunderstanding, right? And so sensual thoughts are those thoughts which are following that blind faith, that sensual pleasures, that these things in the world, that these are where happiness is, that these are where we should find our sense of happiness. These are where we should rest our mind, right? So if you get concerned about how your body is, concerned about food, concerned about tastes and smells, if it obsesses the mind, if you have lots of desire towards those things, those inclinations, those obsessions, those are sensual thoughts. And so you can see that these do not lead in the direction that the Buddha is pointing to. Similarly, malicious thoughts. This is kind of the pair to sensual thoughts, right? So we really like things. We really like my mug, right? We feel, it belongs to us. And so if someone takes it, if someone breaks it, if someone chips it, then we get angry. You broke my mug, right? You careless. You were not careful with my things, with my beloved possessions. And so, right, it's silly, but we do it, right? Don't we? We get upset. We get angry. We get malicious. We get resistant. And when our body feels pain, we're resistant. When we see things we don't like, we're resistant. When we hear people that we don't like, we're resistant. When we hear ideas that we don't like, we're resistant. And so when we taste food that we don't like, we're resistant. And so we get resistant towards things which don't gratify our senses. We get resistant towards people who don't gratify our senses, towards beings and creatures, animals, insects. We get resistant towards our environment. We get resistant even towards ourselves, right? And so thoughts which are malicious, which are resistant, which are angry, these are also unwholesome. These are also unbeneficial. We have to learn to distinguish when is our mind going in that direction. And then the last type that the Buddha mentions here are vihingsa vitaka, thoughts of cruelty, thoughts of harming, right? And so thoughts of cruelty are a step beyond malicious, resistant thoughts. So if someone chips your mug, you might be very angry, upset that the mug is broken, upset at the person for chipping it. But if you have cruel thoughts, you might even think of chipping their mug, right? Retaliating. You might think of harming them. And so that would be bad, right? That would be unwholesome. It's a step beyond just resistance. And it's where you want to then inflict pain on others. You want to inflict pain on yourself. You want to harm your environment. So it's when the mind is not just pushing, but it's pushing beyond and pushing against, really pushing to hurt, pushing to harm, pushing out of cruelty. And so, yes, these are the two aspects of resistance, two aspects of aversion. That sometimes we're so deluded that not only do we resist, but we even try to harm, right? And so the opposite to sensual thoughts, the Buddha says, are nekkhamma vitaka, thoughts of renunciation, letting go of sights, letting them be in their own domain, not getting involved in them, letting go of sounds, right? If you hear different sounds, pleasant sounds, you don't become interested. Unpleasant sounds, you don't become bothered. You let them be. You let them go. You don't get involved. They're none of your business. So you don't direct your mind out towards them. You don't get your mind involved, entangled, wrapped up in them. And similarly, cruel thoughts, malicious thoughts. You don't get tangled up in those things. You don't want to harm others, but you develop compassion because you understand that resisting, pushing, harming, hurting, cruelty, these only cause more suffering. They only cause more pain. They don't lead to disillusionment, to dispassion, cessation, peace, insight, awakening, and extinguishment. They don't lead to pleasant abiding. They don't lead to the well-being and welfare of others. They lead to suffering in yourself, the suffering of others, the detriment of yourself, the detriment of others. So we learn through beginning the listening to the teachings and trying to reflect on those, trying to bring those into our hearts, trying to apply those to our life. You try to learn, what is good, what is bad, right? It's like distinguishing between healthy food and unhealthy food. In the beginning, we like unhealthy food, right? But if we train ourselves, we might be able to learn to appreciate healthy food and dislike unhealthy food. Become uninterested in unhealthy food. Right, so I'm sure that all of you have experienced that to some degree. Right? How does it feel when you start to appreciate exercise? You start to appreciate being healthy. You start to appreciate being kind. And then other things like being lazy, being unhealthy, not being kind. Then you might start to feel like that's very coarse. Like you don't want to go there, right? So we have to learn, but we have to watch. Because our defilements will tell us otherwise, right? Ignorance and craving, attachment, grasping, greed, hatred, and delusion, they'll tell us otherwise. The sense of self, pride, conceit, inferiority, superiority, measuring ourselves against others will tell us otherwise, right? It'll tell us that we deserve to indulge in sensuality, that we deserve to be angry, right? It'll tell us that it's okay to harm, but it isn't. So we have to be careful. We have to discern. We have to watch. We have to use your ingenuity, use your discernment, use your mindfulness, your wisdom. Learn to shape those tools so you can really get in there, work with the mind, right? And learn to distinguish. And that's the real study. It's not something you need to take an exam over, right? The only exam you have is when you sit down and you close your eyes. Are you more peaceful? When you interact with others, are you more mindful? Are you more kind? Right? So that's your exam. Do you pass? Only you will know, right? Well, maybe other people will know too. But you want to try to pass that exam. You want to study the heart. You want to bring these teachings inside, contemplate them, become skilled in them, right? So it's only three things: sensual thoughts, harmful, malicious thoughts, and cruel thoughts. Can you learn those 3 things, right? You can count them on your hand. Can you learn those 3 things? And even if you can't, you don't even need to know the names. You don't even need to remember the list. Of course, it's helpful to, but even that you don't need to do. You just need to look, right? You look at your mind, you look at your heart, and you see which thoughts are leading your mind to peace, which thoughts are leading your mind to clarity, which thoughts, which intentions, which flowings and tendencies of the mind are leading your mind towards the wholesome, towards the beautiful, towards what's kind, right? And which thoughts are going away from that. And so the Buddha, when he talks about the defilements, those things which corrupt the mind, which make the mind not beautiful, which lead the mind to suffering, then one of the words he uses are the asava, right? Actually, this is the main term for the defilements, which are the cause of the cycle of rebirth, the root at the round of birth and death, aging, sickness, the cycle of life, the cycle of existence. The Buddha says the asavas. And in the Buddha's description of the training that one undertakes from the beginning, the middle, and the end, training their mind, taming themselves to eventually become awakened and realize the goal that he taught, right? Eventually, at the end, he describes how someone who reaches the end, they end the defilements, they end the asavas. And the asavas, it literally comes from the word which means flowing, right? And so sometimes you might hear people say, go with the flow, right? Just go with the flow. And actually, we are going with the flow. We've been going with the flow since time immemorial, since time without discoverable beginning. We have been going with the flow towards sensual pleasures, the flow towards existence, the flow because of ignorance. So our mind has been flowing, it has been streaming, it has been moving and channeling outwards. And when we go with the flow, it doesn't lead towards disillusionment, doesn't lead towards dispassion, it doesn't lead towards cessation, towards ending, doesn't lead towards peace, towards calm, doesn't lead towards awakening or insight, knowledge. And it doesn't lead towards extinguishment, towards quenching, towards nibbana. It doesn't lead towards those things. So going with the flow of our mind means going with our defilements, right? Now, of course, there is a skillful way of using that teaching on going with the flow, but we have to be careful because our mind does flow. It is flowing, and it is flowing in the wrong direction, right? It's flowing towards sensual pleasures, kamasava, flowing out. So when we meditate, when we learn to discern what's wholesome and unwholesome, we're trying to learn to bring our mind inwards, can we gather the energies of our mind? Can we charge our mind up by making it still? Can we make it simple, beautiful, clear, alert, awake? Can we make it unmoving? Can we do that? Can we collect the different pushing and pulling, right? The tugging on the mind. Can we collect that together and settle it, right? Can we make it unified? Can we make it whole? Can we kind of knead it together into a unified, complete, content, still, happy, joyful, satisfied mind? That is the training that we're trying to do, right? That is what we're trying to cultivate in our practice. That's why we cultivate sila, wholesome, beautiful habits, habits of non-harming, habits of renunciation, habits of non-cruelty, virtue, right? That inner goodness, inner integrity. We're trying to cultivate that normalcy of mind, trying to cultivate a beautiful, even mind, which is not pushed and pulled by sensual, malicious, and cruel thoughts with its actions, right? So we try to train our body not to be indulging in unwholesome sensuality. Try to train our body not to do things which are malicious. Try to train our body not to do things which are cruel. And when we train our body like that, we're actually training our mind. So training in sila, training in virtue, training in moral integrity and inner principles, it's actually training your mind to be more content within itself, to be more gathered together, to be more beautiful and wholesome, to want to be with itself, right? Because when our actions with the body, we move our body because of our mind, right? Because of our intentions. because of our interests, our inclinations, our passions. And so if our body is being driven, if it's flowing out towards indulging in unwholesome sensual behavior which harms others, sensual behavior which harms ourselves, then actually that means that our mind is very unwholesome. Our mind, the thoughts of our mind, the kama vitaka, the thoughts, the kama sankappa, which are going out towards sensual pleasures, they're so strong that they drive our body, right? They push us and pull us, pressure us, incline us towards unwholesome behavior. And then, because our body reinforces our mind, right? Because when we do things with our body, the intention has to be very strong. It trains our mind to go out. It trains our mind to flow and be interested in sensual pleasures. And so then our mind cannot come together. It cannot be content and happy within itself, right? We can't just be happy to be there, just happy to sit with ourselves. We can't make our mind still. We can't make it simple. We can't make it profound. But it becomes very surface level, very scattered, right? Bits and bobs going here and there, all over sights and sounds, smells, tastes, and touches. Thinking about various different things. Thinking about the past, the future, and the present, right? Thinking about what we can get and what we don't like. So the mind, when it's obsessed in sensual thoughts, when we act out of those sensual thoughts with our body, then it just trains the mind to go out more, to flow out even more. Similarly with our speech. And similarly with our, of course, intentional thoughts, right? So if we catch ourselves thinking greedy thoughts, thinking thoughts about sensual pleasures, like, oh, I want this, I want that. Oh, I don't know if I have enough of this. We don't want to renounce. We don't want to be generous. We don't want to give away. Or if we're disparaging and praising people because of sensual, worldly, surface level things, right? Then things with the conduct of our body, speech, and mind will only reinforce the flowing, the asava, the outflow of the mind going out towards sensual pleasures. And similarly, then it will be more difficult not to have malicious thoughts, because our mind will then be resistant towards things which obstruct sensual pleasures. Our mind will be angry. It'll be grumpy. It'll be irritable. It will push back when it doesn't get what it wants, when beings obstruct what it wants. And then we might do unwholesome things. We might get angry. We might say unwholesome things. We might think angry thoughts, right? And so when we don't train our sila, our mind, to have habits in our body and in our speech, if we don't train our moral principles, our virtue, our inner goodness by body and by speech and by mind, if we don't make our body, speech, and mind beautiful, then these thoughts of maliciousness, thoughts of anger, of irritation will only grow. And if we don't train our thoughts to be more tame, to be more calm, if we don't train our body and our speech to be more tame and more calm, more even, more cool, more content within themselves, then similarly, cruel thoughts, thoughts of harming, thoughts of hurting will overtake the mind as well. Because if we are filled with desire, acting out of desire. If we're filled with anger, acting out of anger, very easily we will be filled with cruelty and act out of cruelty. We'll want to hurt, we'll want to harm, right? And so we have to train our sila, our moral habits, our inner goodness. We have to train our body and our speech to be calm and cool, to be uninterested in indulging in unwholesome behavior, right? We have to train our body to be calm, right? To be beautiful, so that our conduct with our body, our conduct with our speech, and our intentional conduct with the mind, we train them to be beautiful, to be wholesome, to incline away from obsession with sensual pleasures, to incline away from maliciousness and resistance, and to incline away from cruelty. And that is going against the flow, right? The flow of sensuality, the asava towards sensual pleasures. If you're trained, the flow towards the sights and sounds, smells, tastes, and touches of the world, including the anger, including the cruelty, if you train your mind with virtue, with inner goodness, you are actually going against the flow, right? Not going with the flow. And in a good way, right? In a wholesome way. And so then your mind will be inclining to be content. It'll be inclining towards nibbida. That means your mind will turn away. It won't be interested in things. It'll see that those things are suffering, right? It's suffering to be caught up in that. So the mind has a delusion that it wants to flow out towards sensual pleasures. But actually that flowing out of the mind, that picking up of different interests, that being concerned with various preoccupations, with resistance, with pushing and pulling, with liking and disliking, with greed and aversion, with desire and repulsion, then you'll see that actually that is a state of suffering. The mind flowing out towards those things is actually the cause of suffering, the cause of our discontent, the cause of our not having any peace, the cause of our not being able to sit still. And it's the cause of rebirth, right? The cause of getting stuck in the cycle, of having more senses where then we're pushed and pulled by more pleasure and pain, by more people that hurt and harm us. And so this flowing out of the mind, this streaming out of the mind is the cause of our suffering. So when we train our thoughts away from that, we are training it to be disillusioned, to turn away from the suffering, to turn away from the never-ending rat race of life. Right? Try to rein your mind in, away from things, turning away from things. So then they will fade from your mind, Vitaka, dispassion, right? This is like if you have a very colorful piece of cloth and you put it in the sun, eventually the color will start to fade, right? The color of originally when you dye cloth, the color sticks in the cloth. It's very colorful, very bright, right? You might even stain your skin. It might even stain other pieces of cloth because there's so much dye, so much color, so much interest and passion, right? So that raga, that passion, that interest, the rosy colored goggles that we're always wearing, where things are beautiful, things attract us, that will start to fade from your mind as you turn away, as your mind is not flowing out. It will start to fade from your mind. Your mind will start to become less interested in the world, less interested in the causes of suffering, because you'll see that those things are suffering. Those things are difficult. Those things are not worth enduring and bearing, picking up and becoming obsessed over. And so then you will find cessation, nirodha. Your mind will drop. It will stop those things. It will turn away, lose interest. They will fade from the mind, and they will cease from your mind. They'll disappear. They'll vanish, right? And then you will find it where peace lies, upasama, where stilling lies. Stilling lies not in having, not in picking up, but in cessation, in letting go, in vanishing, in not having. Not in flowing out, not in going with the flow, but in turning the flow away, in cutting off the streams, cutting off the outward flowing of the mind. And so then you'll be more peaceful, right? We want to be more peaceful. We want to be more happy. And so it doesn't mean that you don't interact with people. It doesn't mean that you don't get involved in things, but it's the mind, it's the heart, right? Which is flowing out against our will, flowing out against well, even with our will, because we don't understand, right? So it's actually learning to train the mind to find the causes of happiness. So then it won't be fixated and obsessed in those things. And so then you'll find where peace is, right? Peace of not having to get involved in sights and sounds, smells and tastes and touches. Right? It's like when you sit down and you feel like everything has been done, right? You feel like you've done your chores and you've done what you had to do for the day, at least in a mundane sense. And so you sit down and you just find some peace. Maybe you watch the sunset or the sunrise. You watch the nature and you find a sense of peace, right? Why? Because your mind is turning away from the burdens of picking up the things of the world, turning away from being passionate and getting lost in the things of the world. It drops and it stops those things, and it just experiences more simple things, more peaceful things. It finds peace in the absence of things. And as I mentioned in previous live streams, right, that when it's raining very heavily, there's a heavy storm, thunder and lightning. When the storm stops, you might notice it's so peaceful. But actually, most of the time, it's not raining. But we don't appreciate the peace until we appreciate that something has ended. Or when we're very sick, finally, if the sickness ends, if the body feels better, you might feel like you've never felt healthier. You might feel so good. But actually, most of the time, your body might not be sick. And we don't appreciate it, right? We don't appreciate it because we find the peace when something has ended, when the sickness has stopped. Or if there's loud noises, when the loud noises are over, you find it so quiet, so peaceful. But actually, most of the time, those loud noises might not be there. Right? And that's because you're noticing that something has ended, something has stopped. There's more peace when things come to an end, like the end of a symphony, the quiet after the noise. And so ending, turning the mind away instead of flowing out, losing the passion, ceasing, that actually leads to peace, right? And that peace teaches you, it gives you insight, it gives you abhinya. You get knowledge if you can develop it. Even simple things. Can you develop insight? Can you develop knowledge that ending is better? That stilling is better? That vanishing is more peaceful? And then you start to learn about the life. You start to learn about the world. You start to learn where happiness lies. And you can become more happy, more content. So if people praise or blame, if you experience fame or shame, if you experience loss or gain, if you experience pleasure or pain, can you make your mind unshakable? Can you know that those things are not where happiness lies? Those things are not where peace lies. Peace lies in not being concerned with them, with letting them go. And so on. Right? And then you'll get awakening. You'll attain awakening. You'll attain deep knowledge. True knowledge into the nature of your mind. True knowledge into what is good and what is bad. What is wholesome and what is unwholesome. What is beneficial and what is harmful. What is kind and what is cruel. And you will attain nibbana, extinguishment, quenching. The quenching of the fires, the burning in the heart, the burning in the mind, the burning in life. Right? Like on a hot summer's day, a cool drink. The quenching of suffering, right? And so when you train your mind away from that obsession and fixation, that flowing out towards sensuality, towards cruelty, and towards maliciousness or anger, when you do that first by training your body to be more kind, to lean away, to be more generous, to be more renunciant, when you train your speech to be more renunciant, to be more simple, when you train your speech to be more kind, when you train your speech to be uplifting towards others, then you're actually training your mind to go against the flow towards suffering, and training your mind to be going towards the flow of happiness, towards the flow of peace, towards the flow of awakening. And that is actually the second part of the sutta, which the Buddha says you should think. When you're thinking, you should think. You should think about the Four Noble Truths, or you should think of the Four Noble Truths. You should see what is suffering as suffering. You should see the cause, the origin of suffering, as the origin of suffering. You should see the end as the end, and you should see the path as the path. And actually, if you learn the unwholesome thoughts, you're already learning the Four Noble Truths, right? Because we've already talked about that. If you see that when the mind is going out towards sensual pleasures, that those sensual pleasures, those sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and touches, that pleasure and pain, the fame and the shame, the praise and the blame, right? That is all suffering, meaning that it's all just a burden. It's not to be concerned with. When we pick it up, it burns our hand. When we touch it, it burns. It's like touching a hot stove, right? So if we get obsessed with the different things of the world that we can't control ultimately, that don't satisfy us ultimately, and we know that, right? We learn it, at least intellectually, but our heart doesn't know it, right? So we have to train it with this. And when you learn to distinguish like that, you're learning what is suffering. You're learning what's not worth picking up. And you learn what is the origin of suffering. What is the picking it up? It's the mind flowing out. It's the mind getting interested. It's the mind getting fixated. It's that craving. It's that desire. It's that thirst, that hunger, right? And so hunger is never full. because hunger is always, it's the wanting, right? As I've talked about. So we have to learn that the cause of this picking up, the cause of this obsession is actually the mind flowing out, getting interested, the asavas, the defilements. And so you're learning by distinguishing good and bad thoughts, by training your mind in that skill and that craft. You're learning about suffering and about the cause of suffering. And then similarly, you're learning about the cessation of suffering when you drop those things, when you let them cease, when you turn your mind away from them, you let them fade away and stop. That's the nirodha, the cessation. That's the vupasama, the peace, the stilling. And then you're learning the path. The path is none other than that practice. None other than the practice of turning your body and speech, your actions of body, speech, and mind away from sensuality towards renunciation, generosity, away from maliciousness and towards kindness, away from cruelty and towards compassion. When you turn your mind away from the outside world, away from sight, sound, smells, tastes, and touches, away from resistance and anger, but instead towards a sense of kindness. When you turn your mind away from resistance and cruelty, but towards compassion, and you collect it together, you gather it in, you simplify it. Can you collect it in samadhi? Can you gather it together into unification, into bright stillness and peace? And then can you discern that principle? Can you discern the reason why the mind thinks that happiness is outside? Can you let go of that cause of suffering? And so actually that is the path, right? Training in distinguishing good and bad thoughts, good and bad mental states, training the heart like that. That is the path, right? And inclining the mind towards the wholesome. So the Buddha says you should think about the Four Noble Truths. You should think not even about them. It's not an intellectual thinking about. It's not that you need to read about them. It's not that you need to discuss the philosophical points of them. It's not that you need to argue and debate about them. He's saying you should think this is suffering, right? So you should see suffering as suffering when it arises. You should see what's picking it up as you're picking it up. You should see how to drop it, right? You should see the path to drop it. So it's actually in your experience, in your daily life, you should be looking back, turning the light on your mind and seeing what is the mind doing? Where is the suffering and how is it picking it up? How can it drop it? And what is the path? So it's actually an inner reflective type of thinking, right? It's not a thinking about. It's not a thinking in terms of with ideas and knowledge, but it's thinking with the lens of the Four Noble Truths, right? Changing the goggles from beautiful rosy-colored goggles, which get lost in the world, and changing them, flipping them around, right? To see how the mind gets caught in the world, how the mind gets caught in suffering, and how it can find peace, happiness. And so those are a few thoughts, and this sutta could actually go on for a long, long time because it's really, the essence of the practice. Right here, the Buddha has summarized it. So you learn to distinguish the movements of your mind. Is your mind moving out towards fixating on the characteristics of things? If it is, it's going to get caught in desire. It's going to get caught in anger and irritation, grumpiness. It's going to get caught in depression and dejection. But if your mind doesn't get fixated on the characteristics, doesn't get fixated on the things, but it gets fixated on what is the nature of that thing? Why is my mind picking it up? Why is my mind obsessed over it? How do I drop it? Not the story, but why the mind is getting lost in the story, right? So when a thought comes up in the mind, you don't need to get concerned about the thought. You get concerned with why is the mind picking that thought up? Is that mind leading to happiness or is it suffering? Is it leading to peace or is it just leading to more burdens? And you learn to let it go. You learn to let it cease. You learn the path to let it cease by stilling your mind, by stilling your unwholesome behavior, by making your mind content, kind, peaceful, awake, right? And so there's a lot to be said about that. That is the practice. That is the path. That is Buddhism. That is the teaching, right? That is the whole path right there. But you can start just by observing in your mind, by studying for not the exams of the intellect or the exams of the world, but the exams of happiness, right? The test of contentment, the test of peace and kindness. You can test that by looking at the movements of your mind, looking at the inclinations of your mind, looking at the flowing of your mind, and not going with the flow, not going with the stream of that, but try to turn against it with a sense of clarity and peace. And the path is something that when you walk it well, it's beautiful in the beginning, beautiful in the middle, beautiful in the end. And so can you find that beauty? Can you find that peace, that happiness, and that joy? So these are some reflections that I offer for you all today. I hope that this is helpful, beneficial to you, and I hope that it was clear. I apologize for my faults and lacks in explaining it, my lack in the ability to talk about this, but I hope that to the best of my abilities that it was beneficial in some way for you. And so this time, if you have any questions, I'll take a look at those. And if not, then I will go ahead and close for the morning. And so good morning to people. Greetings to Madeline, Maria, to Bhumika, Edward, Gregory, Richard, Jayanta, Ronald, and also Megan, who is my mom. Good morning, Mom. Love you and hope you're doing well. Hope you're having a good morning. I don't know if you're working or not, but yeah, so I'm very fortunate to have my mom listening in. And it looks like there's no questions. And so I'll give it just a minute or so. And if not, then I'll go ahead and close for the morning. Okay, I don't see anything. All right, everyone. So have a wonderful day. Have a beautiful day. And please try to bring this into your hearts. Let us all practice this. Let us all try to bring this in to the best of our abilities so that we can adorn the world with our practice and that we can adorn our hearts with more beauty. So have a wonderful day.